Hi everyone. Today we will study deep learning for speech synthesis and voice conversion. This is Berrak Şişman. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Texas at Dallas in the United States of America. So today we will briefly study speech synthesis and voice conversion. We will look at the introduction and then history, followed by we will studying voice conversion applications and some of the voice conversion fields, such as expressive voice conversion, emotional voice conversion. I will share some of the publicly available implementations that we have in our lab, as well as some of the data sets that we have that you can basically just download and use. And followed by that, I will be sharing some of the future directions with you. So I got my PhD from the National University of Singapore, and during that time, I spent some time in University of Edinburgh and also at RIKEN in Japan. As I highlighted, I'm currently at the UT Dallas, and at UT Dallas, I have a lab on speech and machine learning. So today, some of the slides and frameworks that I will be sharing, I have worked on them together with these really good students that I have in my lab. So if you have any questions, feel free to approach me or my students to learn more about the frameworks that we will be discussing. So to start with, in our lab, we focus on an interdisciplinary study that involves speech synthesis, voice conversion, emotion, as well as deep learning methodology. So if you think about it, we express meanings and feelings through speech, and machines are still unable to do the same in a human-like manner. And this motivates me to study the theory and practice of expressive speech synthesis. I do believe that speech and language will soon become an integral part of any human-machine interface. And when we say speech synthesis, very basically speaking, it means computer-generated simulation of human speech. And when we look at the state-of-the-art speech synthesis frameworks that we have right now, they are optimized to generate natural speech, which is not ready for real-time human-machine dialogue. And if you read some of the papers on speech synthesis, you will see that today's frameworks do not attempt to understand or express empathy, and machines' ability to speak like a human in a live conversation will mark an important step. So in our daily life, an effective, engaging, and cooperative human-to-human conversation that we have, it includes so many aspects. Things like communicating with kindness, expressing empathy, agreeing, disagreeing, seeking common ground, or seeking understandings and feelings more than being right. And very basically speaking, we expect machines to do this in a human-like manner, but they're unable to do this right now. So with our team, we study the theory and practice that enable such speech synthesis at UT Dallas. So before going into technical things, I would like to show you some of the examples of speech synthesis from the history. For example, in 1939, more than 60, 70 years ago, we had a World Fair in New York City, and this is the voice generated by the World Water, the synthesizer, and this will be a dialogue between a human and a machine.
Will you please make the voter say for our Eastern listeners, good evening, radio audience? Good evening, radio audience. And now for our Western listeners, say, good afternoon, radio audience. Good afternoon, radio audience.
Followed by that, in 1959, we have Haskins.
I printed this file without looking at a spectrogram. Can you understand it?
And in 1962, we have some speech synthesis works from KTH in Stockholm.
Welcome to the Stockholm Speech Communications.
Sorry.
Welcome to the Stockholm Speech Communications Seminar.
And then from Bell Labs in 1973.
I can read stories and speak them aloud. I do not understand what the words mean when I read them, but I can guess which words are important and which words are not by rules I have been given.
And from MIT.
Speech is so familiar a feature of daily life that we rarely pause to define it. It seems as natural to man as walking, and only less so than breathing. Yet it needs but a moment's reflection to convince us that this naturalness of speech is but an illusory feeling.
And more recently with deep learning, we have Takatron 2.
in planning its data processing techniques.
And followed by that, we have more expressive speech synthesis frameworks like expressive Tokatron.
In planning its data processing techniques.
So these are just some of the examples for you to, imagine the progress that speech synthesis field had over the last 60, 70 years. And as I highlighted, speech synthesis is a computer-generated simulation of human speech. And voice conversion belongs to a general technical field of speech synthesis. And in voice conversion, we convert or change the properties of speech. For example, voice identity, emotion, and accents. And as you can imagine, voice conversion is focused on the manipulation of speech, and it represents one of the challenging research problems in speech synthesis. And in this lecture, we will study the theory and applications of voice conversion together. So this is just a very basic example of voice conversion. We have the source speaker and we have a target speaker, and we are trying to find a mapping between these two speakers while we protect the linguistic content. So we have the source speaker that says hello, and we are trying to make the identity, change the identity of this utterance. And in voice conversion, most of the times we have parallel or non-parallel training data. And throughout the lecture today, you will hear the word parallel or non-parallel all the time. So before talking about the technical details, I just want to explain what parallel and non-parallel training data means from the voice conversion perspective. So in voice conversion, during training, we have source and target speakers. And just imagine that source is male and target is female. And when we have this parallel training data, it means that source and target speakers are saying the same thing. It is really straightforward. So let me just, play some of the examples.
Why, I wouldn't say anything about it, even if I fell off the top of the house.
So this is the source and this is the target.
Why, I wouldn't say anything about it, even if I fell off the top of the house.
And even beyond, where the paddocks were, and the berry patches.
And even beyond, where the paddocks were, and the berry patches.
And just imagine during training, you have these, utterances from the source and target speaker, and these are parallel utterances. And at runtime, you now have an utterance from the male speaker.
There is nothing so very remarkable in that.
And you are trying to convert this utterance to sound like the female speaker.
There is nothing so very remarkable in that.
So this is the case where we have parallel training data. And for non-parallel training data, so we have this male speaker again.
Why, I wouldn't say anything about it, even if I fell off the top of the house.
Now we have this female speaker.
They came and went.
As you can see now, the utterances are different.
And even beyond, where the paddocks were, and the berry patches.
Falling from 4 frosted half-globes set in the scrollwork of the ceiling.
And at runtime, we have an utterance.
There is nothing so very remarkable in that.
And we are trying to do the conversion so that it sounds like this.
There's nothing so very remarkable in that.
So as you can see here, we are trying to find a mapping from source and target speakers where the linguistic content is totally different. So as you can imagine, this is a more challenging task, and I will show you some examples. Some frameworks, deep learning-based frameworks, where we can actually achieve this. So, but when we look at the big picture of voice conversion, this is, how it works. So we have the source speech as the training data as well as the target, and we use these utterances for training. And once the training is completed, we have the conversion model. And at runtime, which means during testing, you have the source speech, and you first perform analysis and some sort of feature extractions here, and then you perform the mapping, and then you reconstruct your converted signal here. So I want to highlight a couple of things. So for the mapping part that you see here, mostly this is deep learning based. And again, for reconstruction as well. In the past, we were using signal processing based reconstruction techniques, but more recently, we are using like neural vocoders to generate waveforms. So, and when we look at the applications of voice conversion, there are tremendous opportunities for novel products and services, from medical applications to restoring the patient's voices, to personalized conversational assistants, talking heads, social robots, dubbing of movies and games, cross-lingual applications, conversational AI, and even singing, like from from speech to singing voice conversion. And as you can see here, we can improve the perceptual quality of voice. Like you can have dysartic speech or whisper speech, and through voice conversion applications, we can actually achieve clear voice. So there are so many opportunities out there from real world. And when we look at the history of voice conversion, the very first paper was published in 1988, and it was based on vector quantization, so followed by techniques like fuzzy vector quantization, Gaussian mixture models, and dynamic frequency warping-based approaches, kernel partial least square, and non-negative matrix factorization. And in the more recent years around here, we have the deep learning-based approaches, things like LSTM, DNN, PSR is an ASR-based deep learning approach, and PPG as well, an ASR-based deep learning approach, followed by generative models and these neural vocoders and GAN plus WaveNet. There are some other frameworks as well. So I would like to play some of the speech samples to you so that you can, observe the progress. So this is the vector quantization.
The groundhog clearly saw his shadow, but stayed out only a moment.
And this is the fuzzy vector quantization.
The groundhog clearly saw his shadow, but stayed out only a moment.
We have Gaussian mixture model.
The groundhog clearly saw his shadow, but stayed out only a moment.
And NMF, non-negative matrix factorization.
One odd detail. All these books were shelved indiscriminately without regard to the language in which they were written.
So I would like to highlight that until here, most of these frameworks that we listen, things like VQ, vector quantization, Gaussian mixture models, and NMF. In these frameworks, we use limited amount of parallel training data. But with the deep learning, we have this, for example, LSTM here.
There is more behind this than a mere university ideal.
This framework requires like parallel training data, but hundreds of it. Or we have the PPG.
There is more behind this than a mere university
This framework can able to perform good voice conversion, but for non-parallel training data and for many speakers. And we have DNN.
Anything unusual or abnormal was sufficient to send the volatile.
For DNN, we need parallel training data and a huge amount of training data, and as well as GAN plus WaveNet.
Philip stood undecided, his ears strained to catch the slightest sound.
So I think here the bottom line is we cannot directly compare these frameworks because they all work under different assumptions, and it really depends on your problem and also the constraints that you have. But if you have, for example, limited amount of data, and if you want to use deep learning methods, then it becomes a bit more challenging task, because then you need to find fancier ways to train your model, because most of them require a large amount of training data. So with that motivation in mind, I just want to show you this GAN plus WaveNet framework. This was published a couple of years ago, and this is really a framework that is very simple to understand if you are new to the field. So this framework has 3 stages during training. In the first stage, we have source and target speech samples. They are parallel, and we use word analysis. This is just a speech, like a signal processing-based speech processing kit. And after word analysis, we do DTW, and we use a generative adversarial network for the training. And after that, we have training phase 2, where we have lots of data from other speakers that we haven't seen, and they are not voice conversion speakers, and we train a speaker-independent WaveNet vocoder. So basically, we take advantage of the publicly available data here. And in training phase 3, what we do is that we combine these generative adversarial network that we trained in phase 1 and the speaker independent WaveNet vocoder, and we perform adaptation on the vocoder so that it can work well for the converted features. So here WaveNet vocoder acts as a vocoder as well as a residual compensator. And at runtime, you have the source speech, you use word analysis to get the features, then we have generative adversarial networks, and then for F0 and for other features, we are just doing some simple stuff like linear conversion. But for the spectral features, like malcapsular features, we first use the trained generative adversarial network to get the converted features. Then we input them to the WaveNet, which works as a vocoder as well as a residual compensator. And when we listen to speech samples, we observe a much better performance compared to the traditional vocoders. So this is a framework where we have GAN and a world vocoder.
Philip stood undecided, his ears strained to catch the slightest sound.
For those who have not heard anything about word vocoder before, it is just a vocoder that is not trained, that is not learnable. And we have this proposed idea of WaveNet vocoder as residual compensator.
Philip stood undecided, his ears strained to catch the slightest sound.
So when we look at the recent challenges of voice conversion, the more recent ones, what we observe here is that high quality voice generation with very limited data is still a challenging problem. And we also have cases where source and target speakers do not use the same language, like source speaker can be a Turkish speaker, whereas the target can be an American speaker, and we do not have any bilingual data. So it makes the problem much more challenging. And in the literature, there's also not much focus on expressiveness, speaking style, emotion, and accent. And all these needs to be taken care of when we are building voice generation frameworks. So with that motivation in mind, I would like to talk about expressive voice conversion. So when we look at the traditional voice conversion that we have seen in the previous pages, so we basically focus on speaker identity conversion for speech with a neutral expression. But in real life, we are expressive. Human speech is expressive, and we express different emotional states with their own styles, right? So in a recent study, so we focus on a new research topic to jointly convert the speaker identity and speaker-dependent emotional style, which is called expressive voice conversion. So as you can see here, our focus is not only speaker identity, but it is also how we reflect, how we express emotion as well. So we have emotional style and we have speaker identity in real life. And we are trying to find this mapping from the source and target speaker, from source to target speaker, so that when we generate the voices, it sounds emotional, it sounds expressive, and it sounds more realistic. And to do that, we have worked on a paper that was also published at IEEE ASRU. So what we do here is that we take a generative StarGAN approach, and we have these emotional recognizers here, speech emotion recognizers. So speech emotion recognizer is something really simple. Basically, speech is the input, and the network is giving you the emotional state as the output. So this speech emotion recognizer is trained with a large amount of training data, but our data does not overlap with this training data of SER. So we just use this SER here as a tool to get some sort of rich emotional embeddings for the spectral features of speaker A, speaker B, which means source and target speakers. And then we condition the generators that we have in our StarGAN with our emotional embeddings. So here the idea is actually straightforward. We aim that the proposed framework optimizes the distribution of the generated acoustic features to match that of the target features from emotional data. And with the additional input emotional style features, proposed framework learns to project both emotional style as well as speaker identity into the converted speech. And in voice conversion, evaluation is very important. We look at multiple things at the same time. One of them is objective evaluation, which means some sort of distortion metrics. And in our case, malcapsular distortion is the most popular one. And for this value, the lower it is better. So, and our proposed method achieves much better results than the traditional StarGAN approach. And moreover, we also need to conduct subjective evaluation, which means listening experiments. So we hire the human listeners and we share our speech samples with them. And we ask them to do MOS, which means mean opinion score, to judge the speech quality, as well as speaker similarity and emotional style similarity with preference test. So we give them two options, the baseline and the converted speech, and the original target as well. Then we ask them to choose which sample sounds similar to the original target. And in our experiments, we always observe that the proposed framework is better. So I do hope that until here, the idea of expressive voice conversion is clear. So from here onwards, we will be discussing emotional voice conversion, which is, again, an important research direction under speech synthesis. So in emotional voice conversion, what we are trying to do is to manipulate the emotional state of a speaker. So we have the happy voice, and the target is to, generate it generate a set voice. And we have this analysis followed by mapping sort of approach here. We use some sort of vocoder to get the spectral features and the fundamental frequency, and then we perform mapping on these features. I will show you some of the frameworks that we can actually do this with publicly available codes. But before going into that, I just want to highlight that we can potentially have parallel training data, but this is expensive and difficult to collect, or we can have non-parallel training data. But in this case, the linguistic content is different. So let's look at the current challenges in emotional voice conversion. For those who are working on similar directions, I think these could be potentially helpful to you to look into that. So one idea is limited data, because we are lacking of large amount of high quality emotional speech data set for synthesis purposes. So non-parallel training data, parallel data is difficult and expensive to collect, and emotional prosody modeling, because emotion is actually like emotional prosody is hierarchical is in nature, and it is really complex to model, and controllability. And another important thing is, we want to convert voices for unseen emotions, unseen speakers, and so on. So, we would like to achieve that, which is having a method that can generalize well. So, today I will show you two emotional voice conversion frameworks with the codes and an emotional speech synthesis dataset. So let's look at the dataset first, because the frameworks are actually using this dataset. So when we started working on this 3-4 years ago, we discovered that even though in the field there are like so many emotion-related datasets, we cannot use them for voice conversion or TTS, because like these are not suitable for speech synthesis research. So these 4 datasets, these have very limited diversity of sentences. For example, the first one has 2 different English sentences by 24 actors. So this is definitely not enough. We need more than 2 sentences. Or like we have 12 different sentences in English, 10 different in German, and 15 in English. So these are really not enough to train a speech synthesis framework. Then we have 5 and 6, like the very famous IOMA-CAP and IMPRO databases. These are really large, these are good, but from the speech synthesis perspective, they contain overlapping speech and external noise, so not suitable for speech synthesis. And then we have IMOVDB. So this data set contains nonverbal expressions and limited diversity of speakers. And then we have CMU and, the last database, and it only contains 1 single emotional. So none of these data sets are actually good enough for speech synthesis. And with that motivation in mind, we release a new multilingual and multi-speaker parallel emotional speech dataset. And this dataset is publicly available, and you can use it for monolingual VC, cross-lingual VC, and emotional VC. So we have 350 parallel utterances by 10 native English and 10 Mandarin speakers. For each language, the data contains 5 male, 5 female speakers with 5 emotions: neutral, happy, sad, angry, and surprise. And you can just download it from here. So I need to scroll the emotional speech dataset. And if you want to learn the details about emotional voice conversion theory and all the databases that are potentially available out there and the emotional speech datasets, just, you can check this paper that we published recently, and the link is here. This is also publicly available. So let's now look at the emotional voice conversion frameworks that we worked on. The first framework was published in InterSpeech, and it is called Converting Anyone's Emotion Towards Speaker-Independent Emotional Voice Conversion. So in this paper, we would like to have a framework that can potentially convert anyone's emotion, which means that it doesn't matter which speaker comes during runtime. The network should be able to, find that mapping for emotion. So we protect the speaker identity here. So the first framework is based on an encoder-generator discriminator sort of idea. So we have 2 VAW GANs here. The first one is for the spectral features, and the second one is for the F0 features, and we use continuous Fourier transform analysis to get the, temporal scales for F0. And for spectral features, we have the encoder that gives us an emotion-independent embedding. Then we have the generator where we also condition it with the F0. And then we generate the spectral features. And then we have the discriminator to tell us if it is real or not. So this idea is really straightforward, and it gives you a framework that can actually potentially work for anyone's voice. And we release the codes and speech samples for this framework here on this link. So feel free to just take a look at it. We shared all the steps so you can just follow and, train your own model to convert anyone's emotion. Another framework that I would like to talk is published in ICAST last year. So this is seen and unseen emotional style transfer. So this is a framework that can really generalize well because it works for seen and unseen emotions. What I mean by seen and unseen emotion is that during training, just imagine that you have neutral, happy, and angry voices, but no sad at all. So your framework is able to convert to sad, even though you do not have sad during training. So this means unseen emotional style transfer. So how we do it is that we have the encoder decoder discriminator idea similar to the previous work, but at the same time we also have a trained speech emotion recognizer, and we use this speech emotion recognizer to get the deep emotional features, and we input these deep emotional features to the decoder together with the latent representation that we have from the conversion encoder, and then the decoder generates the constructed speech features, and then discriminator tries to detect if it is real or not. So through this way, actually, at runtime, you just imagine that you want to generate an angry voice. So you just input an angry voice to the SER, you get the angry deep emotion feature, and then you input it to your blue box, which is this decoder that you see here. So for this framework, the codes are also publicly available as well as the speech samples. Feel free to check this page, to train your own network. And if you have any problems during, while training, to approach me or Joe, the first author of the paper. We are more than happy to help you with that. So let's look at some of the future directions. So expressive voice conversion with very limited data is definitely an important topic because in real life, we cannot collect everyone's voice easily. And another point is building voice conversion frameworks that can potentially help our society and people from all around the world, like for people whose native language is low resourced, speaking in non-native language, and people with speaking disability like diacertic speech or whispered speech to clear voice, and the presence of background noise, emotional speakers, and expressiveness. And if you're interested to learn more about voice conversion and applications, this is a paper that we have written a couple of years ago together with my colleagues from the University of Edinburgh and NII Japan and National University of Singapore. And in this paper, we very basically explain all the challenges of voice conversion from statistical modeling to deep learning. So if you're interested in, working on speech synthesis and voice conversion, I do believe that this could be a helpful paper. We talk about the very basics of the framework, and then we go deeper and we dive into the technical details. So just to sum up, today we have studied speech synthesis and voice conversion together. I try to show you some of the historical perspective of it, and we played some speech samples together, and we have studied expressive voice conversion and emotional voice conversion, which are more applicable to real life because the traditional voice conversion and speech synthesis frameworks just focus on natural speech, but we are expressive. And we have seen some of the voice conversion applications. You now have access to two publicly available codes and data sets, one of them being this, and the other one is converting anyone's emotion. So if you're interested, just check these websites, take a photo of them, and just go there and check to see if you can train your network. And as well as we discuss some of the future directions if you are interested to do research on this topic. So thank you for listening, and feel free to approach me from my UT Dallas email. It is berrak.sisman@utdallas.edu. So thank you very much, everyone.
Merhaba, öncelikle sesim geliyor mu?
Evet.
Bu akademik kısmından değil de biraz daha pratik tarafından soracağım. Tek kişinin konuştuğu podcastler training data olarak kullanılabilir mi burada? Biraz daha duyguları alabilmek için.
Tabii yani datanın kalitesine bağlı ama evet kullanabiliriz tabii ki.
Teşekkürler. Var.
Öncelikle teşekkür ederim hocam. Hocam benim sorum tonlamanın ve vurgunun anlamı değiştirdiği dillerde problem tanımı ne kadar etkileniyor? Çince gibi.
Bir daha sorabilir misiniz? Tam ben sesi duyamadım da. Tonlama kısmını duydum sadece.
Tonlamanın, vurgunun, kelimelerin anlamını değiştiriyor olduğu dillerde konuştuğumuz problem tanımları ne kadar etkileniyor?
Örneğin mesela biz Mandarin dili için bazı TTS, TTS framework'leri train ettik ve yani Mandarin için train ederken bunu additional information olarak sisteme vermemiz gerekiyor. Yani tonları mesela 1, 2, 3, 4 tarzında bir ekstra input olarak network'e vermemiz gerekiyor. Eğer yani tonları önemsemezsek çok farklı anlamlar üretebiliyoruz. O yüzden yani doğrudan İngilizceyi train ettiğimiz gibi değil ama ekstra bazı şeyler uygulamamız gerekiyor datamıza.
Teşekkür ediyoruz. Başka soru var mı acaba? Hocam ben bir soru sormak istiyorum ama
tabii ki.
bu özellikle işte konuşma sentezlemede eskiden beri var olan sizin de bahsettiğiniz bazı işte capstrum, melcapstrum gibi böyle daha önceden çok güzel, kaliteli konuşma sentezleme öz nitelikleri vardı. Şimdi herhalde o tamamen bu yapay sinir ağlarının ürettiği modellere kaydı ya da öz niteliklere kaydı diyebilir miyiz? Yoksa onları hala kullanıyor musunuz?
Hocam bundan yaklaşık 3-4 sene önce böyle çok limitli datamız olduğu zamanlarda daha böyle yine istatistiksel metotlara yöneliyorduk. Ama şu aşamada çok limitli datamız olduğunda bile artık hani deep learning tarzı metotları kullanmanın yollarını bulduk. Örnek veriyorum ekstra mesela speaker verification tarzı networklerden embeddingler alıp hiç daha önce görmediğimiz kişiler için ses üretimi yapabiliyoruz. Ama bu son 3-4 yıldır popüler olmaya başladı. Ondan öncesinde limitli datamız olduğunda tekrardan yani Gaussian Mixture Model tarzı modellere geri dönüş yapıyorduk.
Yani artık hemen hemen tamamen bu deep learning'e kaydı diyebiliriz.
Evet hocam. Bazen clustering tarzı şeyler yaptığımızda K-means tarzı algoritmalar kullanabiliyoruz. Yani aralarda yine deep learning'in olmadığı durumlar olabiliyor ama çoğunlukla evet ana metot daha deep learning odaklı bizim alanımızda.
Bir de bu çok ilginç bir konu gerçekten. Özellikle duyguyu transfer etmeye çalışmak ya da hiç görünmeyen duygunun başka bir konuşmacı tarafından sanki konuşuyormuşçasına sentezlenmesi. Buralarla ilgili yani şu anda yürüttüğünüz çalışmalar neler acaba? Yani ne tarafa doğru gidiyor bu iş?
Aslında bizim şu an bunun üzerinde çalıştığımız birkaç tane projemiz var öğrencilerimle. Yani şu anki ses sentezi metotlarında çok fazla duygu odaklanılmıyor. Ve bizde bazı projelerde genelde bu aslında yani bu alana odaklanmak istiyorsak aynı zamanda speech emotion recognition'la birlikte çalışıyoruz. Çünkü elimizde çok fazla emotional data olmayınca genelde speech emotion recognition'dan aldığımız embeddingler bizim networklerimizi train etmemize çok yardımcı oluyorlar. Ve bu şekilde mesela farklı dillerden yani sadece Türkçe ya da sadece İngilizce olarak değil ama Türkçeden İngilizceye ne tarz değişimler gördüğümüzü de inceliyoruz. Yani mesela ben Türkçe'de konuşurken mutluluğu çok farklı ifade ederken İngilizce'de çok farklı olabiliyor. Bu tarz şeyleri de inceliyoruz. Emotion recognition tarzı metotlarla ve daha sonra bu tarz böyle bizim için
destekleyici olan embeddingleri network'ümüze, ses sentezi network'lerimizle birleştiriyoruz. Ya da bazen birlikte bu modelleri train ediyoruz.
Evet.
Ama tabii bunları unsupervised da yapabiliriz, supervised da yapabiliriz. Yani bazen çünkü çok spesifik senaryolarda datamız olmuyor ya da datamız oluyor fakat duygu label'larımız olmuyor. Bu tarz durumlarda daha farklı teknikler geliştirmemiz gerekebiliyor.
Evet. Yani dolayısıyla hani başka alanlarda derin öğrenmeyi kullanan başka uygulamalar için geliştirilen tekniklerin ötesinde sizin kendi alanınızla ilgili karşılaştığınız özel sorunlara yönelik teknikler geliştirmeniz gerekiyor işte. Farklı dillere çevirilerde duygunun aktarılması gibi problemler.
Evet hocam. Anladım. Evet, haklısınız.
Peki bir soru daha var.
Hocam sunum için teşekkür ederiz. Şaşırma önlemleri var hocam. Mesela bunların çevrimi nasıl yapılıyor? Duygu aktarımı.
Benim sunumumda voice conversion şeklinde anlattığım bölümde genelde bu tarz şeyler şu anki literatürde çok değerlendirilmiyor. Fakat teksten ses sentezi alanında daha fazla iş var bahsettiğiniz noktada. Yani bazı mesela text-to-speech synthesis metotlarında tekstin de anlamına bakıyoruz. Ve yani tekste mesela nasıl anlatsam? Tekste mesela mutluluğa ifade eden kelimeler görüyorsanız bunu text-to-speech synthesis metodunuza ekstra bilgi olarak sunabiliyorsunuz. Bunu her TTS framework'ı yapmıyor ama yani bazı TTS framework'leri sadece teksten ses üretiyor. Duyguyu hiç önemsemiyor ya da bahsettiğiniz şaşırma tarzı şeyleri hiç önemsemiyor. Ama bazı text-to-speech synthesis framework'lerinde tekstin de anlamına bakmaya çalışıyoruz. Yani bir nevi emotion recognition from text yapmaya çalışıyoruz aynı zamanda ve bunu da sesi üretirken ekstra bilgi olarak network'e veriyoruz. Yani sadece aslında bizim için o ekstra bir network, teksteki anlamı, teksteki duygu anlamını bize veren. Bilmiyorum tam açıklayıcı oldu mu cevabım ama.
Anladım hocam, teşekkür ederim.
Yani teksteki duyguya da bakabiliyoruz. Her framework bunu yapmıyor ama bazılarıyla buna ulaşabiliyoruz.
O zaman sanki multimodal diyebiliriz değil mi?
Evet hocam. Daha multimodal bir yaklaşım oluyor o da. Ama tabii bunu hani train etmek daha meşakkatli bir iş olduğu için genelde yani hani literature'da baktığınız text to ses TTS framework'lerinde bu genelde yok. Çok az paper'da ve daha böyle yakın zaman 2021, 22, 23 yıllarındaki paper'larda görüyoruz.
Çok teşekkürler. Başka soru var mı acaba?